And yeah, it was awesome. Thank you. So I'm continuing my series on salt, needs salt, and if you're new to Crosswalk, I'm teaching through the Sermon on the Mount, and I got to the second week, and Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth, and I stopped dead in my tracks because I knew there was way too much for me to talk about in 1 week. So, of course, we turned one verse into an 8-week series, and here we are. But I'm loving it, man. This is getting in my skin, and really cool stuff, which I'll get to today in a moment. But on the next slide, I want to help us refocus, reconnect. This is really what we try to be as Crosswalk people. This is what God people look like, we think, especially according to the Gospel of John. Our idea is if we follow well in the footsteps of Jesus, we got a lot better shot at connecting with God and God working powerfully through us. So I just invite you to say this out loud with me. This is sort of our Crosswalk credo. Let's say it. I choose to follow Jesus, to stretch into Jesus' way of being, to kneel in service, to grace the hurting, to incarnate the Spirit, to connect deeply with God spiritually, to resurrect people from death's grip. So we want to keep that at the fore of our minds as we go through every day. And in your insert, you always have that in front of you. And I hope you'll look at that each day. A couple quick things before I jump in to the text. I put out an annual report. How many of you read the annual report? All right, very good. So one of the cool things that came out, yes?
I have copies available for people who don't have computers.
Very good, thank you. So if you need a hard copy of that, see Dart in the back for you technically challenged folks. That's cool. But one of the cool things that came out of that report was an idea that we've been germinating around here actually for some time, and that's the idea of a community garden. Out here in our front yard, that's an area that cannot be built on because of the piping stuff that's under there with gas lines and all that. So it's kind of a perfect spot to do a community garden. And community gardens are great for a bunch of reasons. Helps us grow food that we can give away, and we're big on giving food away here. And also for people who don't have space to do their own garden, it gives them a place to come and get their hands dirty. And there's a spiritual thing there, you know, when we are connected to the soil, something happens there. I can't quite explain it, but so our sanctuary campus, you know, becomes even more holy ground, literally, at that point. So that's in the works. If you are excited about that idea, there's going to be a meeting coming up with folks that are like you, who really want to see that go and be paying attention the next couple of weeks. We have a couple in our church that they do this kind of stuff. That's their business, and so they're going to help us design it and figure out how to do it, and etc. So look forward to that. And before I get into the teaching, the last thing I want to say to you, before I say this, get this book, $10. It's a great deal. It will change your life. Ragamuffin Gospel. Awesome. So next thing, what I want to say to you is stay awesome. For the next few weeks, I just want you to stay awesome. A lot of times what happens when pastors leave their church for vacation or whatever, everybody else goes on vacation too. And I'm asking you not to do that because we have incredible things in store for you in the next few weeks. Next week, if you know anybody who's kind of going through it in life, man, bring them to this because Bethany Hamilton, 13-year-old, gets her arm taken off by a shark, almost loses her life, and her testimony about how God showed up in that moment is awesome. If you know any teenagers especially, I think it would be incredible for them to hear what she has to say. So come check that out. She's a really cool person, and you'll be impressed. But anybody, not just teenagers, will get something out of that. Dar's got something special cooked up for Father's Day, and then on the 26th, we're going to do sort of a live thing from Africa. It's going to be a really cool day because you're going to have a couple cameo appearances from a couple of our own people in Crosswalk. A college professor, a chemist, in fact, is going to talk about when salt goes bad, when things go wrong, very wrong with salt. And then we're going to have a medical doctor speak into what happens when you eat too much salt and what happens when you eat too little salt in your world. And then we're going to hear from some Africans in that presentation. I want to talk to the leaders of Faraha and find out from their experience in the slum, having grown up in the slum, when they hear Jesus say, "You're the salt of the earth," what does that mean to them? Because they're actually much more like the original audience who heard that phrase than we are. And so I just can't wait to to connect with them and to hear what they see in this text. And then we're going to get some very recent footage from our own team that's over there, and you'll be able to see our lovely smiling faces and see what's going on with that. So lots of great stuff. I'll be back with you on Sunday, July 3rd, to wrap up our salt series, and we'll do it with salty fashion with bacon and burgers and all that. So it's going to be a good time. So anyway, stay awesome. And I got to tell you, you are awesome. And I was putting that report together this week, and I was looking at how many meals we provided in the last 12 months. I just fell off my chair. We provided 125,000 meals in the last 12 months. That's ridiculous. I mean, holy cow. So as you know, we're able to do that very economically in Faraha, which accounts for 120,000 of those meals in the last 12 months, which happens to be probably the only meal those school children are going to get because they're orphaned, they don't have anything else, and if they're not eating that, then they're eating tea, you know, and that's their meal. So just incredibly awesome. Then I was doing the math, you know, as Dar was doing the announcements in the early service, and you know, we're going to hit, in about 2.5 years, we're going to hit our millionth meal that we have provided. And we got to do, I mean, think about that. Our church, our little church, we're just a couple hundred families, but in a couple years, we will have provided 1 million meals for people abroad and here in Napa. I mean, that's crazy. That's awesome. So anyway, stay awesome in the next few weeks. Continue to come support the church because the church goes on even if I'm not here, and Dar's in charge, so it's all going to be good. So it's just like any other week. Dar's in charge, right? All right, so anyway, let's go to the next text. This is what got me rolling. This is Eugene Peterson's version of what Jesus said in Matthew 5:13. Let me tell you why you're here, he says. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. Man, I just love that. So I want you to say that out loud with me, just starting at yours. Say this with me. You're to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. Awesome. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage. This is not an eternal reality statement, by the way. This is not saying, oh, you better watch it or you're going to burn in hell. That's not what he's getting at all. What he's actually saying here, because salt does not lose its saltiness, salt can't lose its saltiness. It's an element, right? But what can happen is when other items come in, other things like gypsum, which was the context in the Middle East, when enough gypsum would get mixed in with salt, you couldn't taste the salt anymore. And so at that point it became fertilizer, trampled underfoot. That's what they're talking about. He's saying, hey, make sure you keep your saltiness because you're the salt of the earth. You matter. The world needs you to be salty people. So that's what Jesus is talking about. And as I envision it, and I think this is not far from reality, I think the way this sermon went down, this is a Sermon on the Mount. This was not a 30-minute, Sunday service where everybody came and heard him speak and then went home. This was like Bottle Rock. People heard Jesus is going to be speaking on the mountainside, and he was well known. So now you got thousands of people, literally thousands of people, that are coming to this venue to hear Jesus talk. And so he starts off, maybe a Friday evening, just hits it out of the park saying, blessed are you who are poor, blessed are you who are mourning, blessed are you who are persecuted, to a group of people that haven't ever felt blessed. And now he's saying, God looks at you, loves you, you're blessed. So everybody's like, wow, where is this weekend going to go? And then they come back the next morning on Saturday morning, and he starts off. He says, I want to tell you blessed people. You people who are dirt poor, you don't feel like you have any influence at all, who the government's told you you're nothing, who the religious elite have told you you're nothing. Here's what I want to tell you. You are the salt seasoning to bring out the God flavors of the earth. That's who you are. And then I think he took a moment, maybe a couple hours, and he started to talk about salt. And what could it possibly mean if we are the salt of the earth? And I think after a couple hours, he said, I'm hungry. Let's eat. And he encouraged people to get in groups and share their food together. And as they ate, he probably said, hey, I want you to talk about this. What's resonating with you here, you salt people? How's this working with you? What's clicking? And I think around the tables, around their picnics, I think each one would start thinking about scriptural references and life stories about saltiness and what it could possibly mean. And so we've looked at those over the past few weeks about some possibilities. And this week, I want to bring up one that I think those people would have said. They would have remembered this story. In the context of the story that we're going to share with you today, there was a guy named Elijah. Everybody say Elijah. Israel's greatest prophet. Even today at Passover meals, Jewish communities gather and they leave a chair open for Elijah. Because in their theology, God's going to bring the culmination of history together, and Elijah's going to return to bring that about. So they leave the chair open, saying that hopefully, by this time next year, Elijah will be with us, and it will mark the beginning of the culmination of history. So Elijah's a pretty big deal. Well, he had a protege, and his name was Elisha. Everybody say Elisha. By the end of Elijah's ministry, he had developed Elisha really well, and he knew he was going to be done with his life on earth. He had a very strange exit. If you've ever read the story about Elijah, he didn't just die, but a chariot of fire comes out of heaven and gives him a ride, and he disappears right back up into the heavens. But before he did that, he recognized that Elisha was hanging around a lot. He says, Elisha, what do you want? What's your prayer? Knowing that I'm about to be done. And he says, well, here's what I want. I want twice as much of what God's been doing in your life, in my life. And he wasn't saying it like a jerk, like I want to be twice as rich as you are. It was more like, man, I've seen what God has done in your life. And I just want that with everything I am. And so Elijah said, that's a tall order. One that I really can't answer for you, but here's what we'll do. When I go, I'm going to leave my cloak behind. You take my cloak, and if you take that cloak and you touch it onto the river that we crossed coming over here, and it parts, you will know that God has answered your prayer. So the chariots of fire come, pull him up. The cloak is left behind. Elisha grabs the cloak, touches the river, and lo and behold, it parts. And he knows God is with him. Now, so that makes him top prophet in Israel. There's a whole bunch of other prophets, but he's top prophet. So right after this moment, the next scene occurs on the next slide. So one day, the leaders of the town of Jericho visited Elisha. We have a problem, my lord, they told him. This town is located in pleasant surroundings, as you can see, but the water is bad, and the land is unproductive. And Elisha said, bring me a new bowl, meaning undefiled, with salt in it. So what I want you to remember, go back to the first week we started talking about salt. I want you to remember that salt was an image, a metaphor for an eternal covenant. An eternal covenant. So part of the instructions to the worship team back in the day was that they were to salt the offerings made to God. And they were to communicate to the people that God is with you forever. This is an eternal covenant that God is making. So that week, if you remember, I made you salt communion before we ate it, to remember that God's love for you is forever. And then I had you salt it again as a statement back to God, saying we're in it with you, and we want this thing forever too. And then I had you salt your offerings as well as a statement like, okay, God, we're in this thing, because salt has that kind of a quality. So think about that, what you see happening here. They're asking the man of God to do something godly, and he's saying, bring salt. So he's about to do something with a metaphor, a symbol of everlasting covenant. So they brought it to him. And on the next slide, then he went out to the spring that supplied the town with water, and threw the salt into it. And he said, this is what the Lord says, I have purified this water. It will no longer cause death or infertility. And the water has remained pure ever since, just as Elisha said. So my question is, I've been thinking about this story, which I'm sure the original audience of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount would have remembered. I'm wondering, how can salt people like us follow suit? What would that look like? And so to get us there, we're going to do some science experiments. You up for some science experiments? Yes. By the way, I don't know exactly what transacted with that river. I don't know if it was a chemical thing. I don't know if God used chemistry and miraculous stuff, whatever. But this is what was communicated both in the parting of the water thing and now the fixing the water deal. Is everybody clearly understood? All right, God's with this guy. God has not abandoned us. God is with them. So whatever happens, don't miss the bigger point, that they are receiving the message that God is with us and he hasn't left the building. So the first thing we need to do, let's get some of my supplies out here. I've got a few things. You're going to learn a lot about Elisha today. And I give you all the references of the stories I'm going to talk about in my blog, which will release precisely at 12 o'clock this afternoon. All right, what do we got here? That's for later. I submit to you 2 glasses of water. All right. So, here we go. Bottle of water from Costco. What happens when you pour a bottle of water over a glass is the glass holds the water in place for you so you don't make a big mess. Isn't that awesome? Wow. All right, that's not the experiment, but it is pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, don't clap for that. Well, you could, I guess, but you don't need to. All right, so I have here a glass of water. Just a plain old glass of water. We might as well just fill both these up. Oh, by the way, on your tables, let's do this real quick. See those things in the middle there? Those salt nugget things? That's salt. Grab one. I want you to hold it. Just feel it. That's a salt pellet. Go ahead and taste it. You people are crazy. Don't taste it. That's insane. Actually, you can. It's just salt. In fact, I pre-licked all of those for you today just to make sure they're okay. All right. So what happens when you have a glass of water and you take an egg that has not been cooked? So these are plain old eggs. When you drop an egg into a glass of water, boop, it sinks. Pretty awesome? Pretty cool so far? Not real surprising. When you take some salt and you salt the water and you take an egg, still uncooked, and you drop that egg into the salty water, beep, whoop. Huh. Here's the deal. There's a character that Elisha runs into. So he had a lot of prophets underneath him. And this woman comes to him and he says, my Lord, my husband was one of your prophets, and he died, and I'm a widow, and I'm in trouble. Creditors are coming after me, and I have no money to pay them, and he's threatening to take my children away to work off the debt. Help. She felt like this. She was a good egg, but she was sunk, and she knew it. She was drowning in her problem. Salty Elisha comes in, knowing that God is with him, and he instructs her thusly. I want you to go to your neighbors, and I want you to get any kind of containers they have, glasses, buckets, Homer buckets, whatever. Just gather whatever they've got and take it into your house. You got any oil in your house? He says, yeah, I got a little bit of oil in my house. Okay, well, just bring all the buckets inside your house, and then take your kids in and close the door behind you and lock it. And this is what I want you to do. I just want you to start taking the oil out of your reserves and just start filling some of the buckets and stuff that your neighbors are going to give you. And she's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense at all, but we'll do it because you're the head prophet and you seem to know what you're doing. So she does exactly that. Everybody gives her the Homer buckets. She goes inside, locks the door, and starts taking the ladle with the oil out of her big jar or whatever it is, and starts just filling up all these other buckets and containers. All of the other buckets and containers, by the way, way out volume her container, but a crazy thing happened. All of a sudden, every container was filled to the brim, and she still had oil left over. A miracle. And so Elisha says, tell me what happened. Well, she told him what happened. And he said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go sell that oil and pay off your debt, and you'll be good to go. Now, I don't know. I wish I could do such a simple prayer for you, for those who, face the mortgage crisis and all that. And that's kind of not the point, but the point is this. When salt people enter in, they find people like this who feel like they're drowning in whatever circumstance they may be drowning from. But salt people are able to get their heads above water. We are able to come alongside and give them hope that they didn't understand. And by the way, I kind of pulled a fast one on you. You might have recognized that if you've ever cooked an egg or cooked anything before. Putting that much salt in a glass, there's no way this is going to happen. I pre-salted this water so I could show you what would happen. My point is this, that sometimes we think when we're coming alongside people who are hurting, who are drowning, and whatever they're going through, if it's a personal loss, if it's their fear, if it is financial, if it's a work thing, if it's their self-esteem, all manner of things make people sink like this. And one little dash of salt isn't going to do it. It takes a lot of salt. That's why you matter. Because when we bring the saltiness of God to the table, when we come alongside, when we incarnate the very presence of God with people, hope enters in. They're not sinking anymore. They're able to get their heads above water. They're able to breathe. You're the salt people. Who do you know that is drowning? You get to be the salt people. Now, as a pastor, I get a front row seat on this stuff, and it's pretty cool to see it. And I've been doing this since, officially, legally and all that, since 1995, so that's quite a while. And I've had a lot of front row experiences where I come across people who are going through messes, and they just feel overwhelmed. And they ask to meet with me because I'm a holy man, right? And they want to know, all right, is God with me in this thing or what? And as we talk and we pray and we talk about things, it is crazy to see what God does in those moments, where you start to see peace replace fear. You start to see calm replace anxiety. It's happened more times than I can recount. It's so cool. You know what that is? That's the salt of God doing its thing. That's adding enough salt to the equation, what we have at our disposal, so people can get through. Who do you know? Who do you know is like this? And they can be like this. You get to do this. So do it. All right. The next story that we have for you. Oh, let's go on to the next slide, Gordon. So we're talking about the hard water thing. This is the drowning egg woman that we just did. Now I want to talk about the tarnished penny man. The tarnished penny man. So I have in my pocket somewhere, keys, that's not going to do it. All right. I have in my pocket, I think, 5 pennies. I have them in that little tiny pocket that's inside the bigger pocket. Does anybody know what that tiny pocket's for anyway? Oh, thank you. All right. So these are 5 pennies. These are real official pennies. And they're tarnished. All 5 of these pennies are tarnished. But there's a crazy thing that happens when you add salt and another element to the mix. This is vinegar. Yeah. So you add a little bit of vinegar. This is an ancient thing, by the way. And this is salt. Add a bunch of salt. Maybe a teaspoon or so. Mix it with your finger so you can smell like a pickle all day. So I got 5 tarnished pennies. This is crazy what happens. 5 tarnished pennies going in. Just going to let those sit. Let me tell you a story. Elisha one day gets a knock at the door. There's this guy named Naaman. Naaman is the commander of an army of a neighboring country that they often get into skirmishes with. Naaman has leprosy. He's a big deal in his country, but he's exhausted all the resources available to him in his own country. And somebody tells him, hey, there's this God guy over in Israel that's doing some pretty amazing stuff. Why don't you give him a shot? So he gathers his entourage and he cruises into Israel, finds out where this guy lives, Elisha, and has a servant knock at the door, and he announces the commander of the army of the king of Aram is here, and he requests your service because he has leprosy and he's hoping that you can do something about it. And Elisha doesn't even come to the door. It's like he's just got it cracked barely, right? He doesn't go out to meet the guy, and the guy is pretty egotistical. He's a pretty big deal, right? And he knows it, and he expects to be treated really, really well, and when people don't treat him well, he gets very, very offended very quickly. And so Elisha doesn't even go meet him. He's just talking to the servant. He says, all right, here's what you do. I want you to have him go down to our river here nearby and take a bath 7 times in a row. 7 baths. That's it. And let me know how it goes. Click. Slams the door in his face. And the servant goes back to the commander, Naaman, who is expecting, to meet Elisha personally. He says, sir, the Elisha guy, he didn't want to come meet you. He was watching Netflix or something, but he did tell me this. He said to go down to their river and take 7 baths in a row. And at that, Naaman blew a gasket. He's like, we've got way prettier rivers in our country. I can't believe the audacity of that guy. Let's get the heck out of here. And so he starts to go, and the servant kind of calmed him down and said, wait a minute. If Elisha would have come out to meet you, and if he would have said, I want you to climb to the top of Mount Sinai to prove that you're really dedicated to this, would you do it? And he said, yeah. All he's asking you to do is take 7 baths in a row in their river. Just, why don't you give it a shot? And so Naaman got over himself, and he's like, you can just hear him grumbling the whole way. Finally, he gets down to the riverbank and goes in once. Nothing happens. Comes out, dries out. It's like, this is just a waste. I can't, this guy, there's a video camera somewhere around here that's taping this. Goes back in, number 2, no change. Number 3, no change. Number 4, no change. Number 5, no change. Number 6, no change. You can see he's about ready to go in for the 7th, and he's ticked off. He's like, if this doesn't work, we're going to go back and we're going to raise that house, man. I'm so ticked off. I'm furious. He's thinking he's being made fun of. But he goes back in the 7th time, and he takes the bath, and as he comes out of the river, the 7th time, his skin is as clean and fresh as a young boy's. And he realizes at that moment that God thing that was on Elisha is real. The tarnish was off. And everybody knew there was a God that was still at work in Israel. When you add vinegar and salt together, your penny goes from tarnished to clean. It's amazing. And if you took some baking soda on this, you could polish it up and make it nice and shiny. All 5 are no longer tarnished. You get to do this. I mean, you can literally do this at home if you want. Just get some vinegar and some salt. But I mean metaphorically, you get to do this. Missionally, you get to do this. Because you know people who've been tarnished and are tarnished and are living with their tarnishedness. Some of the people that you know are tarnished, got tarnished by their own volition. They made choices in their life that they're not proud of. And they don't want to share those stories. And they walk around just feeling like they're wearing a sign everywhere they go. Tarnished, blemished, because of my mistakes. There are other people, I bet you know, that are tarnished because somebody else did something to them. They've never quite shaken it. And it haunts them. People who've been victimized, especially sexually, emotionally, physically, by other people, they carry that around. It's a shame that just weighs them down. They're tarnished. And some people are tarnished just because life is hard sometimes. Sometimes you get cancer and you feel like, oh, it's just killing me. Sometimes your house forecloses. Sometimes you lose your job. Whatever the thing might be, you feel tarnished, like you're not quite as good as you thought you could be, and you feel like you're stuck with it. But you're the salt people. And the salt people have news to proclaim. And that proclamation is this: you don't have to be tarnished. Because the God that has redeemed me and you, He's a God that takes the tarnish off. God is a reset button kind of God. God is a God that wants to start over with you and see what is possible. And I'm asking you, my friend who feels so tarnished, I'm asking you to trust in the footsteps of Jesus. Trust that the God that showed up in the life of Jesus and Elisha and so many millions of other people throughout history, I'm asking you to trust that it actually works. I'm asking you to mark your identity not on what you did personally, what somebody else did to you, whatever circumstance you feel has in some way colored your view of yourself and has changed your vision of the world. I'm asking you to adopt a new idea, a new way of thinking, which does not look at you through all of those circumstances, but you start to see the world as somebody who is blessed and loved by God, and let that run its full course, because you are. You are loved. You are blessed. You are made whole by the love of God. Live like it. So I think it was after my sophomore year in high school, college. And I was a camp counselor at church camp. And there was a high school girl there that, I could tell first night she was disengaged. Had grumpy face all over the place, did not want to be there. Turns out she was a pastor's kid in Michigan. And so I was trying to loosen her up a little bit, and so we took a walk. And she started to unload why she was so disengaged. You know what her deal was? Tarnished. Tarnished. I don't know the backstory entirely, but this girl made choice after choice after choice, which just made her feel worse and worse and worse. And she was like 15. And she'd already been through stuff that most adults I know have never had to endure. And she felt so much shame from her own stuff, from what other people do, all this stuff. She was so thick with tarnish. It's like you could barely see the shine in her. But I just kept talking with her and encouraging her. And by the end of the week, this girl who, would not open her mouth, would not make eye contact, by the end of the week, she was the loudest one singing at campfire. Because God had removed the tarnish. She started to believe this very good news about God. That God is a tarnish remover. That you can be shiny all over again. That God is a God of the reset button. I got to be the one to see that. And you do too. Who do you know that's tarnished? Who needs to know good news? One final experiment. This one has to do with angels, which is pretty cool. So the backstory on this one, you're going to need for this experiment, you're going to need sodium polyacrylate. Everybody say sodium polyacrylate. Hey, you did a pretty good job. Way better than the first service. I'll let them know that. All right, so sodium polyacrylate is very similar to this. This is not exactly it, but it's basically the same thing. Let's see if I'm man enough to do this. Oh man, this would be really embarrassing if I can't open this thing. I'm going to need somebody like Will Nesbitt to save me here in a moment. Get ready, Will. Will Nesbitt is our Young Life director here in Napa. Wave your hand, Will, so you can see who that is. Wave it again. There he is. Somebody else is pretending to be Will Nesbitt. Pay no attention to him. All right, so this is nearly the same thing as sodium polyacrylate, and it's pretty cool stuff. So the story is that Elisha and his prophets were hanging out in the town, and the king of Aram was wanting to invade Israel. And so they did it under cover of night. And the prophets all woke up the next day and they looked around. They were completely surrounded by the army of the king of Aram. And they freaked out. Because they looked at their little band of people and they were like, man, there is no way we can handle this kind of soldier. I mean, they had chariots, they were out-weaponed, they were outnumbered. There's no way they would have any hope. And then Elijah does something really crazy. He prayed a prayer. And the prayer he prayed was just open their eyes that they might see what you're doing here, God. That you would see, that they would see God at work around them. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you get the point. So what I want you to notice here, this is pretty neat stuff. We'll go over here. We have a young student here, Zane. Zane, this just kind of looks like salt crystal, right? You can feel it. Go ahead and put your finger in it. Oh, don't put your finger like that. I'm just kidding. All right. So that's fine. It looks like salt crystals, right? It's pretty interesting stuff. You can put your finger in there. It's pretty interesting. Yep, pretty cool. All right, you want to feel that? Thank you very much. Put your finger in that. All right, just feels like salt crystals, no big deal. It's pretty healthy for you, kind of. So anyway, what happens with this stuff, sodium is obviously part of it. Oh, let's just use this water, the drowning egg woman water. This is the water that I used before. It's just plain old water with a little egg in there now. And he had about a cup of sodium polyacrylate. But a crazy thing starts to happen when you put water into the sodium polyacrylate. It starts to expand. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's super cool to play with. So I want you to feel this. It's super cool. Feel that, man. Feel cool? Yeah, he likes it. All right. Lisa? Pretty awesome. Chuck, what do you think, man? Pretty cool? Yeah, you're going to get a bowl of this stuff later, aren't you? All right. Isn't that cool?
That's weird.
Isn't that cool? Very similar stuff if you go to a mall or a shopping area and around Christmas time, they sell stuff called instant snow. That's probably polyacrylate, where you just add water and you get this cool stuff. I'll leave it up here. You guys can come put your fingers in it later. I'm not going to tell you what I've done with my hands today, so you'll have to just trust me on that one. Here's why I wanted to do this science experiment for you. So the prophets are freaking out because they think they just have this much. They think it's just them in charge here, and they see the armies around them and they think they're absolutely powerless against it. But then when God answers Elisha's prayer to just show them what you're up to, then all of a sudden they open their eyes, and beyond the king of Aram's army, they catch a vision of God's army, an angelic vision. And these angels are on chariots, and they're looking pretty tough. And all of a sudden, these prophets who felt like they couldn't do anything and they were just going to drown, in the fury of this army, all of a sudden they're like, those guys aren't so bad after all. Because they realized that something bigger was at play here. They were able to do more. They had courage based on the bigger other that we have in our corner. Sometimes we feel absolutely overwhelmed by our circumstances. We feel like we're in it all alone, and that's a lie. You are not alone, ever. And if I could pray Elisha's prayer for you, especially when you're in that moment, to see what God is actually doing around, to have a vision of exactly how pervasive is the presence of God, if you could just see that, your doubt would disappear and it would be replaced by faith. Because you would recognize that the presence of God is absolutely everywhere. And the presence of God is related to the core character of God, which is always about redemption, always about grace, always for you, with you, in your pursuit of that. It changes you from cowardice to great faith, because you recognize there's more going on than what your eyes initially beheld. So you salt people, I want you to take this and walk around with this for the next week. Just have it in your pocket. It's not going to do anything, probably. I'm not liable if something happens to your remote. But anyway, keep this handy. Put it on your dashboard, put a magnet on it, stick it on your refrigerator, whatever, I don't know. But I want this before you to remember that you're the salt people. And like Elisha was able to, with salt, communicate through this bad water turned good, that you are able to go into bad situations because you're the salt people. You're the salt seasoning people to bring out the God flavors of this earth. This is your calling. Christ is in you, with you, working through you. How will you salt things up? That is my question for you. Would you please rise for a word of prayer, and then we can go. Do you feel salty?
Yeah.
You are salty. Your shaker should be topped off. You should be so excited about what you get to do because you can do this. This is your calling. You're able to do this. Don't look at it as a burden. Look at it as possibility. You're the hope people in the world. You get to salt people. Not assault people. You get to salt people, and that's awesome. That is your holy privilege. So let's pray about it together. So God, as we leave this place today, may the stories of Elisha and the woman who is widowed, And Naaman, the totally prideful guy who found out his tarnish could be removed, and the fearful prophets who thought they were totally outnumbered, may those stories stick with us and remind us of your faithfulness, of your goodness. You haven't left the building. You're with us. You still want to do the same things. And may we be reminded of these experiments. And when we see somebody drowning, may we just realize that it's our opportunity to bring some salt into that situation. And it may require a lot of salt to get the kind of results that are necessary, just the right amount, in fact. And so help us remember that. And when we see tarnished people, help us remember, hey, we can do something about that. And so give us the insight, the courage, the nudge to go do it. And when we feel outnumbered, help us remember sodium polyacrylate and realize that you are bigger than the problems that we face. You hold eternity in your hands. Even if things go south, we are not sunk. It's not over. We are yours, and you hold us, and you have us, and that will not ever change. May that give us great hope and confidence as we go forward. I pray all of these things in the name of Jesus, who we're trying to follow. Amen.